Hello everybody, and welcome to the inaugural webinar of the Global Expansion Alliance. I'm Cody Silverman, a representative of the Global Expansion Alliance, as well as a Global Solutions Advisor for Safeguard World International. Safeguard World International offers global HR compliance and employment support in over 165 countries. The Global Expansion Alliance was founded to serve as a resource to any organization that's aiming to go global. Today, we'll be taking a look at an overview of key factors to take into consideration while looking to expand your organization into international waters. I have the privilege of working directly with the individuals that are responsible for spearheading their organization's international expansion. And what I've learned in my experience is that the more research you can do on the front end, the less speed bumps and costly surprises will come down the road during your expansion. Now, the research all starts with speaking with the right people with the right experience. Our expert panel today includes Ken Zwerdling, Greg Hunter, and John Galvin. Each of them have extensive real-world experience in operating various aspects of an international business. They have been kind enough to share their insights with us today. On the subject of the right people with the right experience, this concept is key in regards to your staff. The quality of the people working for you will ultimately determine the quality of your business. Our first speaker today is Ken Zwerdling, with over 20 years of international business experience. He is also the founder and CEO of Foreign Staffing, a global leader in multilingual international staffing and recruiting.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ken Zwerdling. I am the founder and CEO of Foreign Staffing. We do multilingual international staffing and recruiting anywhere in the world. I want to thank the Global Expansion Alliance for allowing me to speak today. We have some great speakers. I feel honored to be in their presence. So I want to thank them for allowing me to be a part of this presentation. Today, I'm going to be talking about the complexities of staffing when you're hiring candidates in other countries. What are the differences between hiring people in different countries and hiring people in America? Not just language, but cultural. You know, there are things that you can do in foreign countries when you're talking about hiring, what you can ask for, what you can say in an interview that you can't do in the United States. So this is going to be the focus of my presentation today. The first thing we're going to talk about is the different types of international hiring. There's really not just one kind. The importance of job descriptions, why job descriptions in the US are different when you're trying to hire candidates overseas, what you need to put in that job description, what you need to have the potential applicants see, and how they're going to get a feeling for the type of position and company that you are advertising for. There are legal issues with regards to hiring candidates in other countries. There are payroll issues. How are you going to pay them? What currency are you going to pay them in? Of course, there are language requirements. What does it really mean to be fluent in another language? It's not just, oh, I speak Spanish. We're going to talk about the requirements of language and why that's important. We're also going to talk about interviewing. How are you going to interview potential candidates in other countries? They may not be able to come into your office and do a face-to-face interview. What mechanisms do you have in place to interview people on the other side of the world? Now, we're also going to talk about relocation. The candidates you're looking for may not be in the city where the job is. It may not be in the country where the job is. What's the company's policy on relocation? So we're going to talk about that as well. The types of international hires. Okay. The first type is, we're in America, we're going to hire in France or Germany or Korea or Japan, American companies that are expanding overseas and they need to hire local talent in the market for which they are expanding into. But the reverse is also true. There are foreign companies that are expanding into the United States and they need Americans who speak the foreign language. You have to decide, do you need an American who speaks a foreign language or a foreigner that speaks English? There are also American companies in the US that need bilingual candidates in the United States for call centers, customer service, marketing, outbound marketing. If you're targeting different countries like Brazil or Mexico, they need to speak Spanish or Portuguese, but they need to sit in your office in Boston. So really 3 different types of international hires. The job description. Sounds simple, but most companies get this wrong. They are not detailed and thorough enough. They don't paint an accurate picture of what the position is, what the company is like, all the requirements. What's the day-to-day like? And remember, in other countries, you can ask questions that you can't ask in the United States. You have to be as precise as possible, because the job description has to speak for your company when you can. The more thorough it is, the better chance you have of getting the best candidate. If you leave the job description as incomplete or don't mention some things, they're going to look, a potential applicant is going to look at the job description and say, we're missing, what about, this issue? What about the benefits? What about vacation? In different countries, negotiation on terms and conditions are commonplace, even before the interview. So the more you put in the job description, the better chance you have to find the right candidate. What are the language requirements? What's your relocation policy? How are you going to interview? What if they're not sitting in your particular country? What if they're in a remote part of the world? What if this is a remote position? What if you can't find somebody in your country? Can they work remotely? What does your company do? How does this position fit into the overall benefit of the company? What's in it for the applicant? Too many companies put out static job descriptions. They may find a qualified applicant, but why would that applicant want to work for you? What are you doing to say what's so great about your company? What are the highlights? What's the culture like? Now remember, if you're hiring people in different countries and your job description is written in the same tone that you would use to hire an American, things can get lost in translation because they won't understand the nuances. So it may even make sense to have the job description translated because the candidate's native language is not English. Okay, the next important thing to really take into consideration are the laws about hiring candidates in different countries. It's not the same as hiring in the United States. In the United States, you go online and you create a company and you get a tax ID number and you're set up to do payroll in a specific state. Okay, so let's open an office in another country. Let's hire some staff. And we're in business. Not so fast. You have to do your homework. Hiring in the US is different than hiring in other countries. And every country is unique. Do you have a physical presence? Do you have an office? One of the things that we do when we're given a requisition to find a specific kind of employee in a city, in a European country, in an Asian country, in a South American country. Do you have an office? Sometimes they say yes, sometimes they say no. And if they say no, the question is, well, where's the employee going to work? What location? Are they going to work remotely? Or are you going to set up an office there? But that could take months to set up an office. What's the classification of this employee? Are they a contractor? Are they an employee? What are the rules for each of these countries? What currency are you going to pay these employees in? Probably not in dollars. You'll pay them in different currencies. Also, you have to take into consideration the salary differentials, the cost of living adjustments for American positions, certain education, certain experience, versus the same person in China, Korea, Malaysia, Brazil. Is a $50,000 a year person in the US? Are you paying $50,000 to the same person with the same education in India? There is a differential. Have you done any benchmarks for what that person should earn in that country? Also, vacation policies. France is known for, you start with 4 or 5 weeks. You get every, national holiday. You get a tremendous amount of, sick time. What are the vacation policies? It cannot necessarily be the vacation policies of your company as they are given to employees in the United States. What are the specific guidelines? In some countries, they're actually paid for 13 months out of the year, not 12. Termination issues are important as well. In some countries, there's no such thing as an employment at will country. You can't just fire someone or terminate their employment. There are ramifications for doing so in different countries. So that could dictate how you set up your structure in that country, hiring employees versus hiring contractors. I know you're not thinking about when you're going to terminate them, But if you do have to terminate them and you haven't done your homework on what the rules are in that country, you could run into a problem. Also, benefits, medical, dental, retirement, etc. In the US, that's pretty self-explanatory. But in other countries, some are country-specific healthcare. It's included. You have to check the rules on what these employees are entitled to, sometimes dictated by the actual governments of the countries. What are the tax issues? And again, country-specific holidays. In China, New Year's is an entire week. In the Middle East, a lot of times they don't work on Friday. So every country is different. There are religious holidays, there are national holidays. You have to understand that they're not necessarily the same. They are not the same as they are in America. Okay. Payroll issues. Extremely important. If you don't have a physical presence in that country, how are you going to pay them? Can they accept payment in dollars? Or they can't. We have placed people in Thailand, and they need to be paid in the local currency, which is Thai baht. In Korea, it's the Korean won. Europe, it's euros. Japanese yen. Malaysian ringgit. Brazilian real. It's different. That's really why you need a firm like Safeguard World International, because they understand the requirements, the payroll issues, the legal issues, the tax compliance issues. It's not as simple as just hiring someone and wire transferring money to them, via bank wire. If you're not set up correctly to do the tax legal compliance, you could end up getting in tremendous hot water later on. Okay, language requirements. What does it really mean to be fluent in another language? Americans who speak another language, or foreigners who speak English? Must they be able to read, write, and speak in that language? It's not just, I happen to speak Spanish. Do you think that just because they know another language that they can actually translate or interpret? There are some companies that have their engineers who speak German translating documents. They are not professional translators. Are they just going to need to speak another language? Read, write, comprehension? Are they going to have to read engineering documents in Chinese? Will you test for their language proficiency? Because everyone says, sure, I can speak another language. But there are tests that you can give for all of those categories: reading, writing, comprehension, speaking. You also have to be wary of people claiming fluency in multiple languages. Sure, I speak 6 languages. But really, it's their native language and another one that they are most likely to be fluent in. So when you're talking about hiring staff that knows other languages, what specifically are they going to use that language for? How are you going to interview these candidates? Phone? Probably not in person. Skype audio, Skype video is very acceptable. There are actually video interviewing tools out there today. If you're hiring someone in Brazil and the position requires Portuguese and English, what language are you going to interview them in? Should be discussed on the job description. Interviews will be conducted in English. Now, if the candidate isn't local and they need to come in to your offices, either in America or in a major city, who's going to handle the travel expenses? Are they going to come on their own expense, or does the company have a policy in place? Okay, the last thing is, what's your company's relocation policy? Sounds pretty simple, but are you only considering candidates in a specific city in the US? If there's an opening in France, would you accept candidates from Germany or Italy or other EU countries? Are you going to offer any financial assistance with relocation? Moving expenses, having their family come to visit, assist with finding housing, transportation, driver's licenses, finding doctors, etc. And will you sponsor candidates for visa and immigration? A lot of job descriptions are missing this information. They're not explaining it. So you can go through the process and say, well, I'm not authorized to work in that country. I need sponsorship. Will you sponsor that? Or must they be a resident of the United States for you to hire them? Or what if you need people from Turkey that need to work in the Middle East? How are you going to handle the visa immigration issues? Also, if you have a position in a major city, there's a better chance of finding a candidate that has the background, the education, the language in that city. But what if there isn't a qualified person in that city or country? Where are you going to find these candidates? We've had positions where they needed a plant manager in a remote area of Germany. They would not pay for relocation. So they weren't able to get any candidates to accept the position because they wouldn't pay any of their expenses for relocation. So some type of policy should be in place. Okay. To end, I just want to say a little bit about us and what we do. Foreign Staffing is a international staffing and recruiting firm, placing people all over the world. Over the last 20 years, we built this big network infrastructure of multilingual candidates in different countries, and we know how to reach them, where they are, how to communicate with them, how to screen them, how to present them in any country, anywhere in the world. I want to thank everybody. I hope you found this helpful. If you need the slides, I believe the presentation is going to be recorded. Any questions, you can contact me, foreignstaffing.com, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Very informative. Now, with operating any business, there are always risks involved. There are plenty of risks to consider when operating a domestic business, especially when you're working across state lines. Now, as you can imagine, when you're operating a business across international borders, these complexities can be amplified even more so. A.J. Gallagher and Company has been working with businesses to help manage their risk since 1927 and has been named one of the world's most ethical companies for 4 years running. With over 30 years of industry experience, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Greg Hunter, Area President of A.J. Gallagher.
I have been in the commercial insurance business for 30 years, with the past 15 years servicing businesses of all sizes and exposures in over 70 countries throughout the world. While doing business internationally has become easier, it certainly hasn't become less risky, but can be effectively managed if the risk management and insurance issues are understood prior to entering a foreign country. Companies with foreign subsidiaries, branches, or joint ventures are faced with a wide variety of exposures to loss in the various countries where they conduct business. These companies need to be certain that their insurance programs address the potential risks and are compliant with local regulations. Let's consider some of the risks in different countries. First, language barriers. In some countries, you are required to purchase policies locally, meaning the policy will be issued in that country, local language, local currency, with local terms and conditions. For example, one of our international metal parts distributors must purchase 2 automobile insurance policies to cover Mexico. One policy to cover vehicles registered in Mexico, and a separate policy to cover vehicles registered in the United States traveling in and out of Mexico, because no one insurance company can provide both. When entering a new country, will you become the employer of record? If so, you will need to understand what insurances are needed to protect your employees. In the United States, we commonly use the term workers' compensation, which provides employees with lost wage and medical coverage for injuries sustained on the job. Such insurance is readily available from competitive commercial insurance companies. In certain countries, such as England or Ireland, businesses are required to purchase employer's liability and not workers' compensation. In other countries, such as Brazil, workers' compensation is part of a state scheme. Or China, where the coverage availability varies by industry and region. Or Canada, where coverage can only be procured in each individual province. When it comes to local politics in a foreign country, anything can happen, from government worker strikes to political unrest to crime and piracy. All of these scenarios leave a company vulnerable to a variety of exposures, including reputation damage, loss of customers, business interruption, reduced productivity and profit, to name a few. Take, for example, one of our worldwide nonprofit clients, which had a common practice of carrying a briefcase of cash to and from meetings in Tanzania. That practice ended when one of their company vehicles, while stopped at a red light, was approached, the passenger window smashed, and the assailant absconded with $15,000 in cash. The headquarters senior management team had no idea the cash was being carried on a regular basis. Fortunately, their worldwide crime insurance policy paid the claim. Knowing the capabilities and limitations of your insurance policies is critical. Liability exposures in insurance policies can be particularly challenging since law and legal systems vary widely. Does the liability policy provide true worldwide coverage, or is it limited to claims throughout the world as long as the claim is filed in the country of the company's headquarters? That condition will make a big difference. Legal reforms in many parts of the world are providing consumers, employees, and investors with greater access to the courts, increasing potential for lawsuits. Foreign companies may be especially exposed to lawsuits because of their lacking awareness of or sensitivity to local laws, customs, and practices. Foreign companies also may become the targets of enforcement actions from regulators and law enforcement agencies. Companies with physical locations outside their home country face the wide range of property and liability exposures in each country where they have facilities and people. But even without physical location, businesses are at risk with the mere presence of a company website. Almost every company with a website is potentially exposed to liability from foreign sources, even if it does little or no business in a foreign country. Because the internet is borderless, a company could potentially run afoul of various libel, intellectual property infringement, and privacy laws. Companies that sell products to foreign buyers have even more opportunities to incur liability, such as product liability lawsuits and enforcement of consumer protection laws. What choices does a company have to secure a comprehensive insurance portfolio? Well, companies with minimal foreign involvement may be able to adequately insure their foreign exposures with a single policy providing coverage. That is almost certainly not the solution for organizations with employees, facilities, and other substantial assets in various countries. And seeking a master-controlled, multi-part policy will be most effective to help void gaps and shortfalls in insurance protection. Let's consider the 4 C's. Compliance. Regulations may vary widely from country to country. Ensuring in-country compliance is essential. Improper placement, filing of policies, premiums, and taxes can leave a company without insurance coverage, which it may not become apparent until it is too late after a loss has occurred and the company is subject to fines and penalties. Must policies be admitted, or will non-admitted policies be allowed? Companies need to know what insurances are compulsory and what provider sources are legal and competitive. A good international broker can manage that process. Certificates of insurance. Every country has their own requirements for evidence of insurance. Some will accept accord forms, common in the United States. Others expect cover letters on broker stationery, while others prefer the actual insurance policy. Knowing that in advance, you will save time and avoid delays. Claims. Who will be adjusting your claims? Insurance company personnel or an outsourced third party? Will the claims personnel be in the country of the particular claim or elsewhere? Establish claims handling protocols in advance and at the onset of a policy bind. Costs. Certain countries carefully monitor premium and policy tax payments and may require in-country invoices. Know that in advance and be prepared to pay in-country currency if necessary. Culture. There can be significant cultural differences from one country to another. Traveling throughout and understanding various cultures is mission critical. What is important in one country may not be in another. Employee benefits can be a valuable recruiting and retaining tool, which have to be completely understood from country to country. Some questions we have heard from our clients. We are sending 15 employees to India in 2 weeks. How do we get the benefits? We are hiring one person in Hong Kong. What insurance do they need? The head of our sales division is relocating to Japan with his family. How do we insure them in their personal goods? The benefit plans at each of our country locations differ. How do we know they are all compliant and fair? Partner with an experienced international benefits advisor who has the ability to provide real-time, accurate, and compliant information. Communicate your benefits philosophy and outline a strategy which includes plan design, implementation, market analysis, and compliance assessment. In regards to international compensation, review and understand global reward structures, compensation plans by region, title, merit, and culture. Keep yourself and your workforce informed of changes in country and throughout your company. Help your employees understand the value of the benefit by providing a compensation summary, which includes compensation, housing costs, auto allowances, estimated hypothetical taxes, split payrolls, relocation expenses, tax planning, cultural and language training. Let's discuss international travel assistance. If employees get sick, injured, or encounter emergencies around the world, what do? Travel assistance services are provided as a part of certain insurance policies. Whether employees need help planning a trip, recovering a lost passport, locating a qualified medical provider, or arranging an emergency evacuation because of a natural disaster or political unrest, help is available. Companies need to know who their travel assistance provider is. Establish communications and protocols with them prior to leaving the country to ensure proper attention is given at the time of an incident. Often, accidents and illnesses could trigger multiple insurance policies. It is critical to have one source of communication, one point of contact, and coordination amongst the insurance companies to ensure effective claims management. In one particular incident, a senior level executive was traveling to the UK with business partners and their spouses. The executive suffered a major heart attack during a company dinner meeting. After the initial round of first aid and medical treatment, the individual was flown back to his country for treatment. That incident involved 3 different insurance policies and claims adjusters. 1, workers' compensation, 2, a business travel accident policy, and 3, disability insurance. In another incident, a 22-year-old employee was accidentally killed while on a tour in another country. 6 different insurance policies were involved one way or another. The workers' compensation, foreign liability, umbrella liability, and 2 employer-paid life insurance policies, along with the directors and officers policy, because the employer was sued for negligence and failure to properly train the staff. International business is exciting, rewarding, challenging, and complex, but can be effectively managed to protect a company's valuable assets. Insurance regulations and policies are continually changing, but provide invaluable protection and peace of mind. I hope this presentation was valuable to you. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Greg. Now we had a chance to look at risk management and the staffing aspect. Let's take a look at the nuts and bolts behind the international operations, the numbers. Now, international finance and accounting standards can vary greatly from country to country, and keeping accurate books can be absolutely critical to your business success. Now, our next speaker you may notice or recognize from last month's issue of Global Payroll magazine. He has over 20 years of experience and has been a senior level finance manager for several multinational corporations, including Dow Jones and Thomson Reuters. Please help me welcome our next speaker, John Galvin.
Hi everyone, my name's John Galvin, the CEO of Galvin International. I'd like to welcome you to this finance section of the Global Expansion Alliance webinar. It'll be my pleasure to take you through some tips and tricks that I think every CFO should know before they expand internationally. Because going into an overseas market is an incredibly large commitment for you and your company. It can be very daunting, and look, let's face it, CFOs, like other professionals, are taught and trained in their own domestic accounting rules and regulations. So going overseas is an art in itself and a separate discipline. So here's my objectives for this session. I want to help you prepare for the issues you'll face as CFOs when you expand internationally. I want to give you some tips on what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And these will be based on my experience of expanding and working in over 40 countries worldwide during my career as a corporate CFO. There are some key areas of risk that I think are common in most countries that you're going to expand to, even though each country has its own different rules and regulations. So I want to highlight those because I think they'll be really good for you to know and be aware of up front. Lastly, I will put a special focus in this session, even though we've only got 15 minutes, on ways that I would recommend you think about managing your international accounting and tax. Here's some of my top tips then for international CFOs. Firstly, expect absolutely everything to take longer than it would do in your home market. This applies to everything from commercial activities such as market penetration all the way through to back office activities like, for example, setting up a new legal entity. It's important because we all know that if you start to slip on deadlines and targets in a business plan, then it gives a whole negative momentum to strategic initiatives like expanding into a new country. This can be incredibly unfair because you're still doing the right thing, it's just that you've got an unrealistically tight timetable in your business plan. Next, make sure you get your tax and legal planning correct up front, because it's much more difficult to change these once you're up and running. Also, changes after the event will attract a lot more scrutiny potentially from local authorities. Next, expect the unexpected. Every country has its own particular rules that its own lawmakers have devised for their own good reasons that apply to a lot of areas of finance. For example, payroll taxes. Every country has its own rules for how it taxes its employees. Accounting gap and corporate taxation. All of these rules are basically governed by the sovereign entity, which is the local country that you're expanding to. Choose your local staff and your local outsourcers carefully. Don't just rely on a recommendation or hearsay from the first person that you meet or your trusted accounting advisor in your home country. This is because the standard and quality of finance staff, even within big brand organizations, varies considerably from one country to another. How well does the staff in an accounting firm in Moscow know what their local counterparts are doing in Barcelona? Many of these firms are run really as national or even as state federations by their local partnerships. So look at the quality of the staff that you will be dealing with directly, because you're going to be relying on them a lot. Make sure they've got great local technical competence, that they're responsive to your international customer requirements. For example, check how many international customers they're already dealing with and get references. Ensure that the particular staff you'll be talking to have excellent language skills in the language you need, say English or Spanish. And lastly, scoping is critical. In very many cases, I have seen companies expand overseas, negotiate with suppliers for, say, payroll, accounting, or tax, and then find that that scope, which was negotiated when they had bargaining leverage, doesn't include the things they didn't know about, such as the unexpected year-end registrations or tax returns that they weren't expecting because they didn't see those types of things in their home country. Lastly, I'd say do focus a lot, almost excessively, on getting your compliance right and ensuring that you adhere to local record retention requirements. International tax audits can occur years after the event, and when they do, you have to have the right records as specified by local record retention requirements to satisfy those local authorities. Otherwise, you can be hit with fines and penalties, even if your tax returns were completely correct. Now let's move on to some of the key risks that you'll face internationally. Even though this is a finance presentation, we'll start with legal. There's a good reason for that. It's because it's your legal entity in the country that is the basis and the building block for all your international accounting. For example, in Germany, if, as is likely, you set up a GmbH, which is the most common type of entity in that country, It's that GmbH that technically submits the payroll registration, that submits your accounting statements, and that submits your tax returns and statistical returns. Now, the level of finance compliance can vary in some countries according to the type of entity that you choose. So don't let the lawyers choose this in isolation, and particularly make sure that tax planning is involved before you choose the entity. All legal entities as well have to have a separate and identifiable board of directors, not necessarily living in the local country or nationals of the local country, but you need to check that. Each entity has to have board meetings with minutes, most commonly for doing routine things like submitting the annual accounting returns. Moving on to taxes, that's a more obvious area of risk. Local country corporate income taxes need to be calculated, filed, and paid both accurately and in a timely fashion. One common area that companies have difficulty with when they expand internationally is around transfer pricing and recharges. Let's say, for example, that your French entity relies on admin services and management services from, let's say, your UK head office. You will need to make recharges to that French entity. Those recharges will need to be backed up by a legal agreement between those two companies. Even though they're all part of your group, they're still separate legal entities, so they will need a legal agreement. The rate of the recharge will need to be justified because it's transfer pricing. Tax authorities look at these areas very carefully in order to make sure that you're not siphoning out undue levels of profit from their home territory. So the transfer pricing needs to be documented and in line with third-party open market deals. And this is where tax specialists come into their own in this area. And don't also forget about sales and use taxes, or their common equivalent overseas, VAT or GST. These types of taxes can be particularly difficult to comply with because the level of returns are so frequent, often they're monthly or quarterly, they're extremely visible. They appear on all your documentation, all your invoices. So if you're getting them wrong, your customers or suppliers can pick that up very, very quickly. Accounting. You will need, in most countries overseas, to prepare and file local financial statements in line with local GAAP. Depending on thresholds and local rules, you may have to have these audited as well locally. And that audit is a financial audit that's completely separate from your group financial audit. So in many multinationals, the local audits take way longer than the group audit, rather perversely. One issue that is particularly difficult for many companies to deal with is the low level of materiality in their foreign entities. Because remember, the same audit rules apply all the world round. You set the materiality based on the legal entity you're dealing with, and you audit accordingly. Management accounting is an area that you'll need to deal with. Will you generate this from your own systems, or will you have a separate system in the country? And that leads on to an even more fundamental area of risk around organising and resourcing your local international finance team. Are you going to in-house it with a separate newly recruited team or staff that you transfer in? Or are you going to outsource to a new team of potentially unknown suppliers? Now let's move on to what I regard as the best practice process for producing international accounts and tax returns. It's a 3-step process leading from management accounts to your tax return. In step 1, the management accounts are finalised. If you have a standard accounting policy, which is used for day-to-day accounting worldwide, all your management accounts will be produced using the same GAAP. So for example, a US company may produce management accounts that are US GAAP compatible. In step 2, the local country finance team make any adjustments that are required to convert these into local GAAP. So for example, in German GAAP, the rules on fixed asset depreciation differ greatly from US GAAP. Once these adjustments are made and any required accounting notes are added, these form the local statutory accounts, which you can then get audited, if necessary, and filed. And then, in step 3, the tax team take these accounts as the base on which to calculate the tax return. There will be adjustments required, so for example, adding back non-deductible expenses and replacing depreciation with capital allowances. But it's key that you do this off the local GAAP base. So once these and any other adjustments are made, the tax return can be filed. Unfortunately, the list of key risks doesn't end there. For payroll, one thing you may not be aware of is that you need a local payroll registration in virtually every country, which must be completed before your first payroll can be made. Calculating, filing and paying your local salaries and employment taxes is obviously absolutely essential for your key employees, and making sure that they're paid on time is something that can be particularly tricky. For expats, if you have them, and also regular business travellers from your, say, HQ team to your overseas location, be aware that specific rules can apply. These can be pretty nasty and complex. Sales is another area of risk. For example, sales invoices that you generate from the local legal entity will need to comply often with local regulations on format and content. Think about how you're going to do credit control. Local language I would strongly recommend so that you're talking to your customers in their own language. One other key point is that when you generate sales contracts, look at the legal entity that is authorizing and behind those contracts, because that governs all your accounting. So for example, if you're billing to a German customer from an HQ legal entity, that accounting is very different from billing from the German entity, because that is what drives the revenue and the taxation. Lastly, banking is another key area to consider. Setting up a local bank account if you need to can take an awful lot of time and effort. One area of opportunity I've found is to look at non-bank options for FX. That can save you a lot of money by getting you more competitive rates. Now, there are many other areas of risk I could have discussed, but that's all we've got time for. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope you found this in some way useful. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Please contact me if you need any help or have any other questions at the addresses shown. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Thank you for the finance overview, John. I'd like to take a moment to discuss the HR side of global expansion. Generally, the first step in new market penetration is engaging workers in your target country to test the viability of that market for your business. You can do this by either sending somebody on assignment to that country as an expat, or you can recruit and engage a local national. With an expat, you already have an established working relationship with that person, and that trust is certainly beneficial. However, there are many who prefer to engage a local national who is more familiar with the customs and culture of that country and can provide insights that you wouldn't get from somebody new to that country. A local national could also already be connected with key people in the market that you wish to enter, which can make the entry that much smoother. Either way you go, the employment laws are very different in every country. Here in the US, we have a work-at-will culture where anyone can be hired or fired at any time for just about any reason. Outside the US, work-at-will does not exist, and the employment legislation tends to be much more in favor of protecting the employee rather than the employer. Terminating an employee can be very tricky in some countries. The first difference a lot of people notice is the social cost of the new country. Social costs are the employer's tax burdens for being an employer and are a cost of doing business in that country. U.S. social costs tend to be around 15% of salary and contribute to various unemployment and social security schemes. In Brazil, for example, this cost can be as high as 70 to 120% of the salary, depending on the line of work. Brazil is one of the higher cost countries, but is a great example of how different the international market really is. So, how do you legally engage a worker in a new country? If you have the time and capital, you could incorporate and apply for all of the applicable tax registrations. Due to operational and regulatory costs of having an entity, this can be expensive, but works well for companies that intend to employ many people and remain in country indefinitely. If you're looking to avoid the permanent establishment risk and corporate exposure, then independent contractors could be an option. If this is the route you choose to take, then compliance should be your first thought, and the laws can be gray. One of the major risks of using independent contractors is that a company could unintentionally be creating an employment scenario, and by doing so, open themselves up to all of the responsibilities of being an employer in that country. The laws vary, but major facts to consider are degree of control for directing daily activities and exclusivity of work. Typically, a contractor is autonomous and is only assigned an overall project for which they are paid a set amount. If the contractor is only working for your company and nobody else, the contractor could claim that they are an employee at the end of the contract term and demand the associated benefits. It is up to the contractor to claim their own taxes after completion of the contract, and in many countries, this liability falls back on the paying party if the taxes are never filed. A third option that is quickly gaining popularity among multinationals is utilizing an employer of record. This is a newer trend that allows you to outsource the employment liabilities to a third party. The employer of record will maintain compliance with the statutory laws of the foreign country while you are able to manage the daily activities of the individual. That worker can carry your business card, use your company email address, and report directly to management in your organization. The employer of record will add the worker to an existing payroll, execute the gross to net calculations complete with foreign currency exchange, and make the proper tax filings and social contributions on your behalf under their own entity and tax IDs. The employment contract itself would be between the worker and the employer of record. However, the client would still be able to include the terms and conditions that they wish to offer, such as company policies, time off, commission structures, and more. The employer of record will verify the contract to make sure it is legal before sending it out to the worker to sign. Employer of record services allow you an easy exit strategy if you decide to pull out of that country, because there's no entity to dissolve. This also works well for contingent and project-based labor. The employer of record will be able to guide you through the proper steps of terminating an employment relationship legally to make sure there are no post-employment issues. The major benefit of using this model is being able to shift your foreign payroll paradigm into an accounts payable invoice to add visibility of labor costs in country. You also have the benefit of using a single point of contact to help manage your global workforce, overcoming time zone and language barriers in the process. Workers tend to favor this model over acting as a contractor because of the employee-employer relationship that is a result. That worker is now protected by the employment laws of that country and can take advantage of the statutory social programs. At Safeguard World International, we are the pioneers and industry leaders in employer of record services, with operations in over 165 countries. If you would like to learn more, please contact us. Thank you all for joining us today. We understand that your time is valuable, and we appreciate you spending it with us. You should be redirected to our LinkedIn group momentarily. Please feel free to engage in any of the conversations and post any feedback. Thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.